Hello and welcome to Radically Rational, the podcast. At Radically Rational, we're bringing facts back into fashion. We're making simple sanity sexy again, and we're beating crazies of all stripes back into the shadows and back alleys where they belong. And if I violate that pledge, I get called out by an 8-year-old girl.
Will you please get to your point?
And no doubt I had it coming. Okay, can we all agree that education is the lifeblood of any healthy society? And unfortunately, here in Texas, it looks like we're strangling it with a tourniquet right now, and I can't quite figure it out. It's almost as if Texas has declared war on public education, and it's becoming a suicide pact for the citizens of our state. And so much of the solution here is just common sense. So with that in mind, we welcome to Radically Rational Dr. James Largent, one of the really towering figures in Texas public education for more than 4 decades. Dr. Largent is also the author of the wonderful new book, Leading in Chaos. I recommend the book without any reservation, and we will talk about it extensively. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, we've been looking forward to this so much. You've been, let's see, a teacher, a coach, a principal, a superintendent, and you've been doing that for a long time. So there are all these amazing things on their resume, but this is the one that got my attention. You have never been fired from a job in a business where most people have a professional lifespan of 7 seconds.
Yeah, that's something I guess that's unique about me is that I've never been fired, never been asked to leave a job. And so something I'm kind of proud of. You shouldn't really be proud about that, but I guess I am because it's such a unique situation for people in my business these days, unfortunately.
It is quite a distinction, Jim, and it's got to involve more than just survival skills. What do you think led to that?
Well, I think number one, I've been lucky enough to have really good school boards in most places I've worked. And part of that is when you interview with places, you know, there's got to be a fit and you want to make sure that you fit in with who is going to hire you. And so, you know, in my book, I mentioned there were a couple of jobs I interviewed for that I thought I really wanted. And once I visited with the board and figured out I may not be the best fit for them or them for me, I just declined the job opportunity. So I think that's part of it. And I think obviously leadership has something to do with it. Whenever you are comfortable in leading an organization and you feel like you can use common sense and you get along with most people and can talk with most anybody from any walk of life and you respect people for who they are, I think that lends itself to being pretty successful in whatever you're doing.
There were so many great sections and paragraphs in your book, but along those lines, one of the ones that struck me, you said even as a kid, you were comfortable in a leadership role. Give me the ball, I'm good.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting looking back on my childhood, but yeah, I always wanted to be the quarterback or the pitcher or the class president or whatever it was in a leadership position, whether it was sports or in school. I just, I don't know, I just had the knack for that and had the desire for that. And people seemed to follow my lead in a lot of cases. So yeah, kind of weird thinking back 40, 50 years ago. But yeah, I recognize that I had some leadership traits even back then.
Well, you had the stomach for it too, and not everybody does. And this was cool. When you got your first superintendent job here in Texas, you were the youngest soup in the state.
I was. I had moved up really quickly in administration. The long story, but I was coaching and our assistant principal left after like the first 6 weeks of school. And I was the only guy there on the campus who was working on my master's at the time. And so I was asked to take that assistant principal's job. And that really began my administrative career unexpectedly. And then as I had done throughout my career, once I became an assistant principal, I quickly said, I can do the principal's job. And then after I was a high school principal, I said, I can be a superintendent. And so I started looking for opportunities and found a small school in East Texas that gave me that shot as the youngest soup in the state at the time. And, that kind of began my career as a superintendent that lasted for 21 years in 3 different school districts.
Jim, your new book is wonderful in a couple of different ways. It's a great owner's manual or flight plan for people who are educators or aspire to be educators. But if you're just a citizen of the state of Texas, the discussion here about what's going on, and in some cases, what isn't going on, is really eye-opening.
Yeah, I wanted to make the book obviously specific to school leaders, but also anyone in a leadership position or anyone who wanted to kind of look behind the curtain of how our public schools are being run or should be run. And so, I've had a lot of comments about the book and from people who are not educators who read it, friends of mine who read the book who said, man, I can relate a lot of this to my business, the one I'm running or the one I'm working in. And so it's been really positive, the feedback I've gotten on the book, and been really proud of it.
Yeah, I could tell you as a former local television news director, a lot of that rang really true in that business as well. So Jim, if you don't mind, I'd like to start this with a couple of macro questions here, and then we can kind of winnow this down.
Okay.
But one of my big concerns is, are we scaring really talented, really smart young Texans away from a possible career in public education? Is this now just so difficult and just so nasty that nobody with a brain would want to do it?
Well, we're definitely scaring off some of our best and brightest. When you have, and I hate to get political right from the start, but when you have the governor of our state going into communities and telling citizens that we are training teachers to hate America, there's a problem.
Yeah, it is.
When you have people coming to school board members meetings and accosting staff or trying to indoctrinate 8-year-olds to be transgender or whatever nonsense they're spewing, that's not the business that I started in, when teachers were respected and people thought a lot of the teaching profession, and it was an honor to become a teacher where you could serve kids in your community. And, teachers are still doing that today, but they are under scrutiny and unfortunately outright lies from people who have political agendas. And, they're not getting their way in some cases right now, and they're willing to do anything to get their way. And public education and teachers have become the target of attacks, and it's a shame. It's embarrassing. And the best and brightest are avoiding education because of it. And it's a sad state that we're in right now.
Jim, I've been so much looking forward to this conversation, and my wife and business partner were discussing this last night. And, we're always looking for solutions, because it's one thing to frame a problem. It's another thing to find a path forward. And she was suggesting, and we're exactly the same age. We're separated in birth by 8 days. But civics was a really big deal for us as students. Has that been de-emphasized, and would we do better to re-emphasize it?
Oh, I think definitely we would be better to re-emphasize civics and how government works and the importance of voting. And unfortunately, we've seen kind of the opposite from our leaders in Austin. They've actually tried to start telling us not to teach parts of history that they don't like. There's some narratives out there that some people in Austin don't like. And so what do? We just erase it from our history books, and we can't talk about that. So, we're going in the opposite direction of where we should be going, in my opinion.
Well, Jim, now's as good a time as any. We were going to get into this. So this kind of relates to what I think is this ridiculous discussion about critical race theory. Yeah. You have people demonizing that. They don't even know what it is. And what it is just suggesting that we not whitewash history. That's about it.
Yeah, that's a theory that came from the 1970s in a collegiate, some Ivy League school. And, I'll be honest with you, in 21 years as superintendent, I never had a single conversation about critical race theory or about teaching white kids that they should be ashamed of themselves or any of this nonsense that we hear. But, the easy answer to that now in Texas is it's illegal to teach CRT. So if anyone tells you your schools are teaching critical race theory, you can say you're lying because it's against the law. And if you know someone that's doing it, you need to turn them in because it's illegal. So it's just more of the culture war nonsense that we're dealing with these days.
just a talking point is all it is. And it's politicized, of course. And you have people throwing this word around randomly without actually knowing what it means in the first place, not to mention the fact that it's not going on in our public schools.
Yeah,
and the
most
other thing,
people
it's very
can't even
similar
define
to-
it.
I was just going to say it's very similar to this random and really out of left field use of the word woke. What are we talking about?
I think that's another term for if we don't like what you're talking about, we just call it woke. I don't know. That's another ridiculous issue that I see going on around our country right now. But yeah, I don't know. The woke business is crazy.
Jim, among other things, your new book is frequently really, really funny. And there was one line and quote in particular, and that's the great thing about Radically Rational. You can be indelicate. In fact, you can be indelicate on purpose. But there was a line in there that made me blow snot bubbles across my desk. I was laughing so hard. You said that we in education are now dealing with a new breed of crazy, as if the old breed of crazy weren't bad enough.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 80s, 90s, even when I started my coaching and teaching career, I mean, we would have parents who were irrational, and they, you know, when you're dealing with someone's child, sometimes you can understand that a little bit. We feel like my child's being mistreated, or they're not getting enough playing time on the teams, and so I'm coming to complain, and the coach is terrible. And, you know, people have been dealing with that for years. Now we're dealing with absolute nonsense where people are coming in and, like I mentioned before, you're teaching my 5-year-old to be a transgender. You're teaching our kids to hate America. I mean, where in the world? This is just made up nonsense that people are spewing. And unfortunately, there are people who only listen to certain newscasts or websites or whatever the method of getting their information, and they believe this stuff, and they begin to spew it around. And unfortunately, we have so many citizens who are not engaged and don't read the newspaper or don't get legitimate news, so they believe this stuff. And so yeah, it's dangerous, and that's where we are right now.
Jim, you mentioned this rampant tribalism and politicization, and so many of these issues were reflected in the recent and just completed, not that we're not going to have special sessions, but session of the Texas legislature. Let me just start with this. What is it with Greg Abbott's obsession with school vouchers? Because this one looks pretty cut and dry to me. No, we're not going to fund private education with public dollars.
Well, that's the way it should be. And it's something that most Texans and most people in the United States agree with. But I think the truth is that Greg Abbott has aspirations to be a presidential candidate at some point. And he thinks that the only way to do that is to go so far to the right to appeal to the Trump type supporters and get money from those type of donors. And so that's what he's doing. He's running as far to the right as he can. And you know, fortunately, he's running into some roadblocks, even by other Republicans who know that this is nonsense, and there's nothing good is going to come out of this. And you know, quite frankly, I don't think Governor Abbott is a presidential contender now or probably in the future because of the decisions he's made. And you know, this recent I don't know if we're going to talk more about the legislative session, but you know, he's become so petty that he's vetoing bills that have absolutely nothing to do with education, that are really good bills by Republicans and Democrats. You know, he's vetoing bills that help fire departments. He's vetoing bills that would help get drugs off the street. And he's writing this statement that while your bill may be important, it's not as important as education freedom, which is what he calls his voucher programs. And so it's become so petty that we're not even doing things that everybody agrees is good. Both sides, Republicans and Democrats, agree this is a good bill. We've become so petty that we won't even pass that because we're holding public education hostage. And so that's the real shame that we have right now in our state.
And Jim, petty really is the right word. And not only would Governor Abbott's actions be ethically reprehensible, it's just bad math. If this is just all about his political aspirations, I got news for you, Pally. There aren't enough of you. You cannot get where you want to go that way.
No, I think unfortunately, the way our system is set up is you win elections in the primaries. And in the primaries, the extremes on both sides vote in high numbers. And so, you take those extreme views to a primary and you can win, but when it has to go to the general public and the population, it's normally a loser. And so that's where I think he's making a mistake. And, when Abbott was first elected, we thought he was going to be someone who could bring the state together and work across the aisles and do good things for Texas. And we supported him to do that. And unfortunately, as the sessions have gone by, he's gone far and far to crazy town. And, it's gotten to where it's just, you just scratch your head. What is this guy thinking? Because he is certainly not thinking in the best interest of Texas. And he's not supporting things that the vast majority of Texans support. So I don't know exactly who's in his ear or who's advising him to make these decisions, but I think he's going down a really dangerous road.
And again, just practically, if he has higher political aspirations, that's not the way to get there. Jim, there was something else in your book that just triggered this light for me. Aha. You discussed your views about vouchers in great detail, and I was fully online. And then you said, and here's something you may not realize. This whole charter school thing is just another ruse and another end run. And I had an aha moment then.
Yeah, the charter deal started out as what I thought was going to be helpful. It was basically focused on at-risk kids, taking them out of a normal school setting, giving them an opportunity to succeed in an alternate setting with alternate curriculum, freed up the charter schools to do some things differently, hire different people that may or may not be certified. It really appealed to me back in, I guess this was probably in the 90s when this started coming out. But now it's just morphed into a money game. And, I can go open a charter next week at my local strip mall and put some computers in there and start drawing funds from the state of Texas if I go through their very simple process to get approved. So, charters is it's a step above vouchers, but the money is still the main deciding factor in that. And so, public schools are having to deal with charters in a lot of areas, and charters do take some of the kids away from public schools, and it basically puts them in another public school within a public school. So you talk about funding schools, and that's just another way to divert money away from the schools in your community that are educating 99% of your children.
You are what you value, and your values as a society are reflected on what you spend on. Okay. I'm like a really old dude, but for 50 years now, since I was cognizant, I've been hearing all this talk and all this lip service about how educators are the most important people in our society. We need to pay them appropriately. And in a half century, it's never gotten past the lip service stage, and then just gets unbelievably ridiculous in the just completed session of the legislature. All of a sudden, the tooth fairy had given the state of Texas a $35 billion surplus. If there was ever a time to do the right thing, this was it, and they got nary a penny.
Yeah, then just another embarrassment of what's going on in our state right now. And I'm like you. I get tired of hearing lip service. We want to have, from our leaders, we want to have world-class education. We expect our teachers to be the best. We expect our schools to be the best. We need to compete with China and India and everyone else. And then you look up, and Texas is number 46 out of 50 in funding public schools. So again, if you really want us to be world-class, you might want to fund us at a world-class level. And people always say money's not everything. Well, in education, money is a lot. If I can incentivize teachers to come to work for me, pay them more money to work in some troubled schools, I can make sure our facilities are up to par. I can have the best curriculum. I can have after school programs for kids who may need that. There's a lot of things you can do with additional funds. And, Texas has repeatedly proven over and over again that we don't value our public schools because we don't fund them. And, there was a bill by Representative King out of the Panhandle that would have made a dent in this. Was a very good bill, I thought. I think it was House Bill 100. And again, it got held up as hostage from the governor. So there are bills out there that could help. And I will say this, we're recording this on June 20th. As of today, the legislature has done absolutely nothing for public school teachers, for public schools. My hope is that if you listen to this in August or September, maybe they will have come to their senses and will have had a special session to address this. But it is a crime that we're sitting on $35 billion of our money, our taxpayer money that we put into the system. And we're just letting teachers and public schools hang out on the limb to die unless the governor unless the governor gets what he wants. And I don't really think that's how a democracy is supposed to work. You have branches of government, the House and the Senate, who pass bills. And, in this case, they've passed a lot of bills that would help. But unfortunately, the governor has decided he's going to hold that hostage until he gets what he wants. So we're going to have a standoff here, I think, until the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor get in a room together and come out with something that actually works, and then convince the governor to sign it.
Another good, honest, common sense answer, our guest, is Dr. Jim Largent, who has done just about everything there is to do in Texas public education. And Jim, if you don't mind, another big question here. It seems to me that we've gone beyond mere neglect for education and to education. We now have shown disdain for it. And it's one of the reasons we started Radically Rational. What is with this anti-education, anti-intellect, anti-having anything to do with objective reality? What is this disdain for education? One of the things I see most frequently, these little silly, insipid memes on social media, I bet I see this 5 times a day. I'm really unimpressed with somebody with a degree. You can have a degree and be an idiot. Well, yeah, or you cannot have a degree and be an idiot. What's the point, and where is this? Why do we have this open animosity to knowledge?
Well, the short answer is, and I preach this all the time. The short answer is educators and people who have education as their prime focal point do not vote in high numbers. And so we, in fact, back in, 15 years ago, Governor Perry was there, and he used to call the school coalition the WASPs, W-A-S-P, the whiny ass school people. And they knew they could get away with it because we don't vote. I mean, this is the biggest mystery. I will go to my grave with this mystery. We have the numbers in Texas to control any election in our state. If educators would get away from the culture war issues for one cycle and say, we're voting public education. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. If you are going to support our public schools, you get my vote. If they would do that one time, just once, and shake up this nonsense, we would fix this problem in one election cycle, because then you'd be listening. Unfortunately, what we have now is the people in power know educators are not going to vote in high numbers, number one. Number two, they know that in Texas, at least, if they can get through a primary and our voters in Texas have a choice between a Republican and a Democrat, they are going to vote for the Republican. That's just the truth. That's just the way it is in Texas right now. We have an attorney general who's been indicted for over 8 years, and we elected him knowing that to be our chief lawmaker. Now, that doesn't even make sense on any planet. His own staff members turned him in for breaking the law. The chief lawmaker in our state, and yet he easily won re-election because he won his primary, and in the general, people vote for Republicans, no matter who's running. So that's a long answer to a short question, but the bottom line is, and I've been saying this for 15 years and I'll keep saying it, until educators vote in high numbers for people who support education, we're going to continue to be disrespected. We're going to continue to be looked down upon. We're going to be continued to not be funded at the levels we should be. And that's just where we are. And until we wake up, that's what we're going to have to live with. And maybe it takes a voucher to totally destroy public education to make people realize what a mistake they have made over these years. But I hope it doesn't get to that. But I'm not so sure it won't.
We as educators have more power than we realize. It's just a matter of exercising that power. Again, it's mind-boggling. Jim, you can't address a problem until you identify a problem. And then you can't solve a problem until you want to solve a problem. And two things are clear here. There are a lot of people who don't even want to solve this problem. And some of them go so far as to love the problem.
Oh yeah, they're using this as a tool to get what they want. And the root of all of this is money. The root of all of this is rewarding campaign donors. The root of all this is, let's use tax dollars for something that's not a public interest, so I can reward my buddies who have private companies that would benefit from some of these bills that we want to pass in form of a voucher. And unfortunately, a lot of our society revolves around money and power, and that's where we are right now. And at the lowly second grade teacher who thinks she doesn't have any power really has all the power. If all of them would vote for people who support their profession, they would find out quickly they have more power than people with money. But we haven't been able to tap into the trick to solving that problem yet. We still show up at about 15% on a good day, and 85% of our educators stay home and don't vote, which it boggles my mind.
Your ability to boil things down is really remarkable. I can see the coach in you. Let me just say that, maybe smile throughout, because you have a true gift for that. So we've got all this conflict between school boards and superintendents. And you worked out a rule in about, 14 words in a paragraph. Very simple. Boards set policy, superintendents run day-to-day operations. Don't run afoul of that and everything's fine.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I mean, we have our job to do, and the board member's job is very important. They represent the community. They're elected officials. There was a saying back in Dr. Bob Thompson's academy I went through when I was a young superintendent. He always said, when you go into a school as superintendent, just remember this: it's their kids, it's their school, and it's their money. And so board members have the authority and the right, and it should be part of their job to set the goals of our school. This is what we want our school to be like. These are the goals we have for our school. This is what's important to our community. And it's your job as superintendent to work with a board, come up with strategies, and then make it happen. They set the goals, we make it happen. And unfortunately, a lot of the conflicts that we see among board members and superintendents, it's where those lines get blurred, and you start having board members who want to hire the football coach, and board members who want to evaluate staff, and board members who want to tell superintendents how they should run the daily operations of the school. And it simply shouldn't be that way. The board's role should be look at the goals that they set, evaluate it each year. Are we making progress toward these goals or not? And if you're not making progress to the goals, then yeah, you need to have a strong conversation with your superintendent, and maybe there's somebody else that is a better fit. But when you hire that superintendent, you need to let them do the job.
Jim, obviously, we want to always respect parental rights, of course.
Yeah.
So nobody is saying anything anti-parental rights. Parents need to be informed. They need to be involved, but they need to realize this, and this is why this gets more complicated in my view. Now we have lone wolf parents who have become self-appointed members of the school board and have effectively become jihadists. That's pretty new.
Yeah, that's a new phenomenon in school boards over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, probably is when it started. But you have, again, they've got a playbook and it works. They find 2 or 3 culture war issues and they run a campaign on it. And there are some groups out there that will fund them. And, a school board election used to run on $100, but there are school board elections now in the DFW area, at least, that are spending $50,000-$100,000 to get a seat on the school board. And they almost always run on 1 or 2 issues. It's either CRT or it's book banning or it's some nonsense that's not happening in the schools. And they're getting elected because people react to firebrand topics and they love the fight and they love, the negative. And so, we have a board member in an area school where I'm from that ran on that and got elected. Fortunately, once she was elected, she figured out quickly that, yeah, we don't have that in our schools. We don't have CRT. Yeah, that was kind of nonsense I was running on. And she's actually turned around and become a good board member. But a lot of times that doesn't happen.
Jim, the effort, though, to ban books is there. That is particularly alarming. I mean, that to me would run afoul and just be anathema to everything that we say we stand for as a society.
Yeah, and in all of these discussions about books and book banning, I've never seen it. Maybe it's happened. I've never seen a student come to a board meeting and say, "Boy, I'm really concerned about the books in our library." I've never seen one student do that. So what that means is this is another one of those trumped up issues that is something fun to run on, and it riles people up. And the truth of the matter is, are there books I have seen excerpts from that probably don't belong in a school library? Absolutely, I have. But there's not 800 of them. We had a politician that sent out this list of 800 books to schools across the state, and some school districts decided they were just going to pull all 800 books off the shelf and totally disregard their own policy about challenging books. And those school districts are still having issues with books because they didn't follow their own policy. They created a problem that they're now having to live with. Other school districts followed the policy and said, yeah, if one of our constituents has a problem with a book, here's the form to fill out. Tell us what page it is that you're concerned about, why you're concerned. Is it pornography? Is it inappropriate age group? What's the issue? How would you like us to fix it? And we'll send it to our review committee and go through that process. And, school districts that took that approach are having much fewer problems with these people coming back to their board meetings every month.
Yeah. And Jim, while we're talking about problems that are trumped up way beyond the numbers that would support it, and we don't have to spend much time on this, but the controversy about transgender athletes and transgender athletic competition, there aren't 100 people in public schools in this country that fit that description. And yet this has become this complete just inferno of an issue. I just don't get it. And I don't know what's motivating.
Well, I think it's just a way to find another group that's not like you to hate and to, they don't have, like you say, it's 0.00001% of the population that fits this. And so they don't have a very big lobby to stand up for them, and they're an easy target. And, it's against what public schools should be about. And unfortunately, they've taken this topic, now we can talk more about competition and what's fair and what's not fair. And I agree with that. There's some discussions about that, but
There are, for sure. And I
when you-
want to acknowledge that.
yeah, and when you start making laws for 0.0001% of the population and you know, it's kind of like making a law saying we're against zombies taking over our government. Well, okay,
I'm against it too.
you can pass a law. Yeah, I'm against that too, but your bill didn't really do anything. So yeah, that's another unfortunate issue that where we're having people who are supposed to be supporting all of our kids and all of our students taking a stand against our own students, which again boggles my mind. You don't have to agree with their lifestyle. You don't have to agree with everything. You have your own opinions about things, but you know, if they're in our schools, we should do what we can to support them and help them be as successful as they can be.
Jim, once again, one of the things that I so much enjoyed about your great book, Leading in Chaos, is that you make such rational arguments and you're always eloquent and you're always respectful, but you're always direct. Let me address homeschooling. I think this is a pretty accurate paraphrase of a quote from you in the book. Let's get this straight, parents. With very few exceptions, you're just not qualified for this job.
That pretty much sums it up. I mean, I said in the book, I've got a doctorate in education. I could not have educated my own children after about 7th or 8th grade. You know, that's the truth. I have seen some parents that did a great job homeschooling their kids, and they the kids became very successful. But I will tell you that 0.001% that we're talking about for transgender kids, that's how many I've seen successful homeschoolers. It's not very many unless they really have, which really isn't homeschooling. If you have a group of people that are together and they're, you know, coalitions of people that are working together on that. But, you know, the biggest issue with homeschooling I have is the social interaction with other kids. And, you know, if your kids are around you all day and that's all they ever see, and you keep them insulated from other facets of life, they're going to have a rude awakening when they have to get out in the real world. So, yeah, again, I've seen it be successful with some parents, and they did a great job with it, and more power to them. But more often than not, homeschoolers are there because the parents are mad at the school, or they've got some more moral or social issue that they're trying to.
Well, we're trying to turn us into a theocracy,
yeah,
which is the foundation for a lot of this stuff.
right.
My. I know we've been talking primarily about public education, K through 12, but if you don't mind, if I reference a couple of things that have to do with higher education, that just kind of blow my mind. This idea now that we can't have any programs that promote diversity and equity and inclusion, because what in the world could be worse than these things, right? And again, it just seems so counterintuitive, and the argument against it is just bogus. And to me, this is just almost a suicide pact. I know this is a politically incorrect movie, but you remember Blazing Saddles, where Sheriff Bart raises the gun to his own temple and threatens to blow his own head off, and they're saying he's crazy enough to. Okay, if you eliminate these programs, the only entity that you're hurting is the state of Texas. We can't attract top people. We can't retain top people. We are at a terrible reputational disadvantage. We have handcuffed ourselves. It's going to have an enormous economic impact. We're going to become pariahs. There's no reason for this. And again, it almost seems like anything that just smacks of basic human decency is getting attacked.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on the DEI things at the collegiate level, so I probably am not the one to speak on that. But like you said, common decency would say if we can give opportunities to kids and staff members who may not have opportunities otherwise. You know, the argument is you're taking that seat away from someone who had higher scores or was more qualified or whatever. And I know that's the argument they make, but again, other than a couple of institutions in the state, that are overflowing with applications that probably doesn't affect anyone else. So yeah, that's it's just again, a lot of this goes back to culture wars. You know, we've got a group of people out there who love to pick groups to hate, and it's so unfortunate that we're having to live through that right now.
Jim, I'll tell you this, in reading your book, I went through, I don't know, 4 full yellow highlighters because there was so much stuff in there that I really loved. And this one I thought was absolutely brilliant. Quote, "Zero tolerance can mean no room for common sense." Riff on, please.
Yeah, there was a movement back years ago that we were going to have zero tolerance to mostly discipline type issues. And so schools would come up with this set of rules that if you do X, your punishment is Y. And so I remember reading this article in one of our big city newspapers about a school district who one of the students had turned in one of his classmates for having terroristic paraphernalia in his car. And so it created quite a stir at the school, as you might imagine. The police were called. They came and, you know, had the helicopter circling and the police cars circling the campus. And they identified the car that the student had turned in. They went and pried open the trunk of the car, and in the car they found a machete, they found rope, they found duct tape, they found rations for several days, they found all kinds of things that would make someone, you know, good gosh, what in the world is going on here? When the police went and found the student who owned the car, brought him out to his car and said, "Tell us what you were planning here. This looks really bad." He said, "Yeah, I'm an Eagle Scout candidate, and I was on a wilderness trip this past weekend to earn my Eagle Scout award." This kid never had a discipline problem in his life. Parents were great. Scoutmaster confirmed the story. Parents confirmed the story. He never made a threat to anyone. But because this particular school had a zero tolerance policy, they expelled this student from their school. Now, how much more stupid can you be as a school to institute something like that where there's no room for common sense? I mean, it's just, again, educators make lots of mistakes too, but this was one of those that was just asinine in my opinion. And so you got to be really careful when you're dealing in a people business. Not everything is cut and dry. Not everything is black and white. You have to have room for common sense.
But at least you were rigid and stuck by your guns. I get it.
You know,
Jim, this would seem to be a pretty good invitation to you to issue kind of a concluding paragraph here. But as somebody who has spent a lot of time in education myself and still involved in education and a lot of time in coaching as well, this just got me going. I love this. It's not okay to be just okay.
Yeah. I think anytime whatever you're doing, you know, if you want to be an athlete or a teacher or a leader or a business owner, you've got to aspire to be better. You've got to improve. You've got to be constantly looking for ways to get better and make your organization better. That's, you know, I came from a coaching background, and players who played for me will tell you I was a really intense, competitive person. I expected my kids to work hard and produce on the field and play smart. You know, mainly baseball is what I coach, baseball and football. But I really had a high level of competitiveness. And when I went into administration, it's a different level of competitiveness, but I always wanted to still compete against the schools around me. What programs can we offer that are going to be better for our kids? How can we get better in whatever it is, UIL or band or athletics or academics or test scores or whatever it may be? What can we do to improve and get better? And I think if you don't constantly push yourself to get better, you're letting everyone pass you by.
Jim, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, because I ask questions like this. Do you have any political aspirations? Because you got my vote. And when it comes to coaches and ex-coaches, I would much rather vote for you than vote for Tommy Tuberville.
I hear you. Well, the one thing you may not know is that in 2018, I did run for the House of the Texas State House. I ran in a really, really red county, and I was not red enough for them. I was a Republican candidate and ran against the West Texas billionaires, and they quickly decided that I didn't fit into the box that they wanted their political candidates to fit in. And so they spent a lot of money to defeat me. But I will say I raised about $100,000 in my campaign, which is not a whole lot for a state house race. They spent over $1 million to beat me, and I got about 40% of the vote. But I will tell you, the experience I had doing that, going around these communities and talking to people face to face, was really good. I think if I could have gotten to a lot more houses and a lot more people, I would have won. Because everyone agreed with me versus the guy I was running against. The problem is they say money can't buy elections. They're wrong. Money can buy elections. It can buy lots of airtime. It can buy lots of mailers. It can hire people to go door to door on your behalf. And in the end, I got about 40% of the vote simply because I got outspent, in my opinion. So more aspirations, I don't know. I've got a pretty good deal right now where I play golf about 2 or 3 days a week, and I work a little part-time jobs on occasion, and I just finished up an interim superintendency in New Braunfels. And so I kind of like the way things are going now. So I don't see any political aspirations in my future, but I'm also a never say never kind of guy.
Well, if you get the itch again, be sure and let us know for sure.
I will do that.
One thing I really hope you pursue is more literary work and additional books. I mean, this is some really good stuff that people need to be aware of. And by all means, let's engage in the shameless plug right now, because it's good stuff.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's been good. And I do have a few more books in the can if I start I've got the outline started. And so we'll see if I kind of am an impulse writer. So I get an itch and I'll set aside 3 or 4 months to write every morning. And so at some point I'll do that with my next one. But the book is real easy to find, Leading in Chaos. Go to Amazon, Audible. It's on audiobook or hardback or paperback. So it's right there on Amazon, Leading in Chaos. You can read the reviews there. I'm proud of them. And if you buy the book, leave a review. I'd appreciate that too.
Well, the book is distinguished by so many things, but especially by its clarity. It is crystal clear. It is impossible to misinterpret. And that's one of the things that I think really set it apart. Jim, we're just absolutely honored. We'd like to do this again with you. And I want to echo something you said a few minutes ago, that we're all hopeful. We want to be optimists. And maybe if we do this again in the near future, things have improved. But we first have to have a realization that things better improve.
Exactly. Yeah, no doubt about that. And just one more thing about the book. If your listeners have people who are educators who want to be educational leaders, this is really a playbook. I mean, it really is. I wrote it for someone, there are only 1,000 superintendents in the state of Texas. You don't have a lot of peers out there to call on. This is a book that you can use. And if you're having an issue with your school board, there's a chapter for that. If you're having an issue with how do I organize my staff, there's a chapter for that. So I think it's a playbook for new leaders to how to be successful, how to transition into their job, and how to be successful as a school leader or a leader of any business, in my opinion.
Yeah, Jim, the book is not only inspiring, it is practical. And that's a good combination and something we aspire to here on Radically Rational, and really why we started Radically Rational in the first place. Jim, it's been a pleasure and an honor, and I look forward to our next visit.
Always good to talk with you, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Dr. Jim Lodge, thank you. Okay, that's going to conclude this episode of the podcast, Radically Rational. But we do want to invite you on a daily basis, or go, 17 times a day, to our website at radicallyrational.com. There are a lot of things we think you're going to enjoy. The whole idea here is, we want to combine information and advocacy, and we're very clear about that, but with a degree of entertainment as well. So I hope that you like that. We do daily videos as well. And the whole thing will remind you, we're doing this because we've gotten so concerned that we have moved away from a fact-based society. So again, the little bullet talking points here, all we're trying to do is bring simple facts back into fashion, make simple sanity sexy again, and let crazies know that they're crazy, because crazy ain't good. And that's what we're all about here at Radically Rational. See you next time. Thank you.